What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Forgotten Outdoors podcast. We're really excited about a guest that we have on today, Joe Andreasen. We go way back with Joe to our high school days.
Sugar City.
That's about all of our guests right now. I promise we'll branch out, but it's just like we have all these gold people that we know from Sugar City,
It's
and
true.
so we know that we need to get him on the podcast. So yeah, Joe, we grew up with him. He used to run track back in the day, do all sorts of relays and stuff. We were decent, I guess. I don't know.
We were pretty good.
Not the worst out there.
So we're going to go ahead, Joe, and just have you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we'll kind of get into the topic of the day.
Cool, yeah. My name's Joe. I grew up in Sugar with these guys. They're a little bit older than me. It was kind of like when I was a kid, it was like, oh, looking up to these guys. They're kind of cool.
And now look at us.
Yeah, now look at us.
And now we're just
Who
in a
would've thought?
dingy basement.
Yep.
Yeah. So my story with the outdoors is a little similar to Ben's, where we just didn't really do. I mean, I was into sports and stuff in high school. Didn't do a lot of like outdoor stuff, even though I lived in a place that was like really good for that. One of the best like fishing areas in the world. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, people travel here from all over the place, and I never thought I moved away for college. Never thought I'd be coming back. Here I am. Just work brought me back, and while I was away, I kind of got into what most people would think of as bird watching. It's a little more complex than that. I mean, when you say bird watching, you think of like your grandma reading a book, watching out like off the patio at her bird watcher or a bird feeder, and we like kind of like to call what I do birding. It's more of like a competitive thing. I don't know. Should we get into that right now? Talk about what birding is? Or?
So that's kind of, for our listeners, that's kind of why we brought Joe on. So Joe has kind of been, he's been a listener, and he's kind of given us feedback throughout the process of us starting and launching our podcast. And we found out that Joe is into birding, and that's something that me and Ben have never tapped into. And as we've kind of had other guests on, we typically like to have guests come on that talk about things that we're not familiar with. So in the past, we've had Landon Cleverly. He's talked about mountain biking. Then we had Dax Harris talk about outdoor photography. And so this is kind of the pattern that we like to do with our guests, is to talk about things that we aren't familiar with. So yeah, Ben,
that's just our whole mission, like with the Forgotten Outdoors, podcast, is when it's Thomas and I, we like to talk a lot about hunting. That's kind of what gets us outside, or fishing. But there's so many other aspects to the outdoors, and we find it really interesting to, interview people and get them on and kind of see a different side to the outdoors and what's driving people, what gets them excited, how they got into it. So we'll dive into all that right now. So yeah, birding is kind of the thing that is getting you into the outdoors. So how did you get started with that? Like what got you into it?
Well, to be honest, I don't know. I always kind of liked the outdoors. I kind of started liking hiking, and my dad's a really good fisherman and stuff. So I like being outside. I didn't realize I lived in a really good place for birds. Like, we had a bald eagle nest in our backyard for
You did.
Ben remembers this. Yeah, we had a bald eagle's nest back there forever. And while I was actually gone away at college, that tree that was in fell over, and they started rebuilding the nest in a different tree. So kind of a cool bird story there. But I think it was like when I was 18 or something, I watched this movie called The Big Year. And not big ear like earlobe, like The Big Year. So 12 months, and it's basically about these guys that spend ridiculous amounts of money to just go around, and they try to see as many birds as they possibly can in 1 year in North America, and it's like a big national competition. And so it's got some pretty big names like Jack Black and Owen Wilson and Steve Martin are like kind of the main characters. So it's like some comedy actors playing this sort of funny, sort of serious movie about trying to find as many bird species as you possibly can. And it does a really good job of highlighting the community of people that do this. So there's just like, I didn't realize it. I looked it up. There's a statistic where I think it's like 25,000 people or something like that consider themselves baseball players in the United States. And more than double that consider themselves birders. So it's just like a huge community of people all over the place that just try to find as many bird species as they can. And it's, I say semi-competitive because it's not like, well, some people take it to the extreme, but most people like me just, they kind of keep their own personal list of birds. They kind of try and see as many birds as they can see in one specific area. And the nice thing is, like, birds are everywhere, so you can kind of, like, wherever you go, you can bird. You don't, I mean, like, I don't have anything against hunting or fishing, but it's almost more accessible than those.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, like, you can just go outside and you'll see a bird.
Right. So I guess my question would be, so, like, you said the movie is called The Big Year. So is that what you do? Do you, like, reset every year? Like, oh, this is what I got this year, and my list goes to 0, and I start again January 1.
Yeah, so it's kind of a personal thing in that sense. Like, if you, most people that have been into it for a little while will kind of do that. But different people take it to different extremes. Like, there's a book called Birding Without Borders by Noah Stricker, where this guy wants to set the world big year record, where he takes a year and just goes all over the world. Like, nobody had ever tried that before. But there's also people like me who just kind of, like, if I'm traveling with family, maybe I'll take, like, a morning and go out and see as many birds as I can. Like, me and my wife, like, we go down to Vegas sometimes, and we'll, you know, it's for different reasons, but I'll go out and try to bird, you know, get a few extra birds. Me and my brother-in-law are both into it, and we kind of have, like, a competition between the two of us.
Gotcha.
But you can also do, like, big days, where you just take one day and see how many birds you can see. You can do, like, big months. People will do, like, state big years or, like, county big years. There's also something called the big sit, where you can't move outside of, like, a circle that you draw on the ground, and then you can only count as many birds that you see from that circle. So there's all kind of different ways you can do it. And most people will keep a life list. So, and that's kind of like the overarching goal for me, is just to have a big life list, you know.
Right.
Accumulate as many bird species as you can throughout your life. And, you know, wherever your life takes you, kind of adds to that. So it's kind of nice that way.
So are there, like, actual competitions where people are, like, putting money in on these, and, like, how many birds can you see, like, in a big month or a big year or something like that, and, like, you have to get, like, photo evidence, or is it just kind of like you make your list and people kind of take your word for it type of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's an organization called the American Birding Association, and they or ABA. So they kind of officiate the North American Big Year. And it's, I say officiating, but it's all in the honor system. The bottom line is the prize isn't a big deal. Like, they don't, like, give out thousands of dollars for, like, the best birder of the year.
Yeah.
But I mean, they put out a magazine every month, and at the end of the year, they do, like, a big year competition magazine edition, and they'll, like, list all the people and include their year lists. And, like, these people are, like, just recently we've broken the 800 species mark in North America. So,
that's crazy.
So yeah, it gets pretty crazy. These people go all over the place and try to find rarities that, like, fly in from Mexico, because, you know, for this specific big year, you can't cross down past the border.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. So, yeah, you don't need photo evidence. So there's kind of, like, a hierarchy of proof. If you can get a photograph with, like, a location pin, that's really nice. That's, like, the ideal.
Yeah.
You, like, one step down from that is just maybe, like, a crummy picture, and then a step down from that would be you just saw it and you know what it is and people trust you. Step down from that is you heard it. If you can identify it by sound, you don't have to see it. So
that's a whole new level of expertise.
Oh yeah.
Now we're talking about stuff that we understand, which is, like, the noises of like elk and deer and things like that. Like, when you hear, well, actually on our bear hunt, like on our most recent bear hunt, we're sitting there and we hear a turkey gobbling in the canyon, and it was like, we stopped everything. It was just like, there's a turkey. Let's try to get it called in so we can look at it. So that's interesting. So I guess my question is, how many birds do you think that you could identify by just the noise? Like a
By
ton?
just sound alone, me, I'm probably pushing 100 species by sound alone.
Okay.
My
I'm
word.
getting there.
My freaking word.
The thing is, most of the birds that are really distinctive with their song are migrating birds, and so they just come. You'll mostly see them in like the spring and summer, but in the winter they go away. So they fly down to like South America, Central America, and stuff. So every spring it's like I'm resetting. So like right at the end of spring, I'm usually like really good, like 120 maybe. But yeah, kind of as the year goes on, the birds start being quiet more. I kind of start to lose a little bit, probably drop down to 80. But
I don't think I have brain capacity to memorize that many noises.
it takes,
I don't know that many
studying.
words.
That's
Let
true.
alone bird song.
That's true.
So like you would be able to like, and I'm just thinking ducks because we hunt ducks.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like you would be able to distinct like a mallard from like a green-winged teal or something like that. Like
Yeah.
oh,
I
that's
can.
crazy.
Those are. I mean, that's a pretty easy comparison. They're not too much different. But if it was like, I don't know, like a mallard and a cinnamon teal, I might have a little bit harder time because they're a little bit closer.
Yeah.
Green-winged teals. If it was like a green-winged teal and a northern pintail, I might have a little bit harder time
Yeah,
telling them apart. But
See, so that's like,
that's a whole new level.
yeah, because I'm like, for us, because, you know, you have bag limits on ducks when you hunt them. It's like once you start getting close to a bag limit, you have to start being able to like know what the
Yeah.
duck is, and that's where if you knew what they sounded like.
Yeah, and we're getting there because we're like kind of new to the duck hunting world.
Right.
We've been more big game, and so like the last couple of years, and so it's like when you see them coming in, like how they fly, you can tell a difference. You know, by like wing beats and everything, kind of like the whistle of the wings, you can kind of tell a difference. And then they do make different noises, but I mean that's something that we're still trying to figure out
that's
and
nuts,
learn.
though.
Like it's,
well, yeah, and I mean through my birding, there's a lot of duck hunters that also bird, and I've met some of those people. Living down in Utah, there's the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. That's a big spot where people go duck hunting, but it's also huge for birders. And so some of the people that I've run into that are duck hunters that bird, man, they're like way better than I am at identifying these ducks. Just like people that have been shooting ducks for like their whole life, you know. And I mean, just to be clear, as a birder, there's a lot of birders that are kind of like against hunting.
I was actually just gonna ask.
Were you gonna ask? Yeah. So
I want to know what that relationship's like between birders and then like bird hunters / birders. Like, what's that relationship like?
So, I mean, obviously, you can see the natural like conflict there. Like, I want to see more birds.
Yeah.
If you're shooting them, there's less birds. But it's like way more complex than that. And when I go birding, I usually don't have to like pay anybody or like I don't have to get a tag to go see a cinnamon teal or wood duck or something. And so I just go. And if it's like a wild refuge, where you have to pay to get in, I pay to get in.
Yeah.
But like hunters put way more money into stuff like this, and that money usually goes to like conserving habitat. And that's not just good for the ducks. That's good for like common yellowthroats. That's good for marsh wrens. That's good for like all these different birds that you hear when you're in those habitats. Yeah. So I personally think that birders should be nice to hunters. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that.
And like I don't think I'd have a problem with shooting a duck like myself. Like if I went out there, I would identify it, and if it was something I hadn't seen before, I'd mark it down on my list and I'd shoot it. There's not time for that.
Mark it down first. Yeah. Mark it down first.
Yeah, that's interesting that you'd say that because I've had that question, and I still get on the fence a little bit like that when I'm hunting. It's because you have like a short window where you can actually hunt and like shoot the animal, but we go out scouting like all the time and are just watching these animals, and as a birder that you gain a great appreciation for these animals. Like it's so awesome to watch them in their natural habitat and how they act and how they interact with their own species and everything. And so there's like a little bit of remorse every time that you kill them.
One less animal out there,
right? I do feel bad, and we don't have to get into that rabbit hole because that's a whole conversation. But yeah, I was curious. I was going to ask you that same question of like how that relationship is with like the birding community against these people that are killing the birds.
And I've kind of thought about it. I've thought about that a lot before, and kind of the conclusion I've come down to is like, you either, and people can disagree with me if they want, but you can either look at humans as, a part of the environment or totally separate from the environment. And I think if you think of them as part of the environment, then we can give and take a little bit. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and I guess I'll dive into the rabbit hole a little bit.
I knew. Sorry.
Yeah, that's my bad.
See, I knew that wasn't going to stop you.
You said the things you did, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to partake in this.
There's no way.
Well, yeah, it's just I agree. Like, us as humans have invaded on natural animals' land. Like, that's just
by putting up a house.
That's the
happens.
matter of the fact. Like, we have built our cities, we've built our civilization, and it's impacted the environment. So therefore, we need to be stewards. We need to take care of them. And hunting can play a part in that, where it is, you're managing populations.
Yeah.
That's why I have a good respect for the Fish and Game. They're watching these populations saying, okay, in this area, there's an overabundance of elk.
Right.
There is that happens in certain areas, and it's like, we need to give out more tags to keep that population back, because if there's too many elk, they're going to eat too much of the foliage, of all that undergrowth, and it's going to be detrimental to a lot of the other animals in this area. And vice versa with like predators. That's why we're big bear hunters, is because you get an overabundance of bears in a certain area, because we put them in these little boxes. Like we have taken a lot of their land and put them in these boxes, so they're not really in the natural habitat that they would have been if we wouldn't be here.
Right.
Like these elk are in a smaller area they're easier to hunt for wolves, for an instance, there. And so it's our job to be stewards of that, and a part of that can be hunting, to manage an environment and, keep the ecosystem healthy.
And I think also having conversations like this because now, prior to having a conversation with someone who birds and looks at birds and, as we get into this, we'll understand it more. But I think having these kinds of conversations allows me to go out into the outdoors, and if I come across somebody birding, instead of viewing it as, get the freak out of here scaring all the birds, it's now this like, oh, hey, mutual respect.
Yeah.
You're just appreciating the outdoors. I'm appreciating the outdoors. Yeah. Yes, I'm carrying a gun. You are not. Mm-hmm. Respect, though, either way. So I think it's cool. I think having these conversations helps open up my eyes to other outdoor activities that might cause for us to come across them while we're partaking in hunting or fishing or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
That's good. And kind of going back a little bit to what Ben was saying, there's all kinds of new research that's coming out that's saying diversity and, richness of an environment goes down when you take humans out of the picture. We have all this basis of study of areas that we've just completely taken humans off of, like all these national parks that have there's certain areas where humans just can't touch.
Yeah.
And we've gone back in and researched that area, and diversity's gone down in those situations. And so good stewardship and good management of areas, not just wildlife populations, but trees, forests, brush, grasslands and stuff. They've been managed for a long time by people, and the better they're managed, the higher diversity goes, and it's a good thing. So
yeah, and that's just Mother Nature. I mean, if it takes its course, that animals go extinct. They get wiped off. They can't survive, and animals adapt and everything. And so yeah, if we want to keep that diversity, which I think most people do, that have an appreciation for the outdoors. I like seeing a diversity of animals and healthy ecosystem, and so it's kind of our job to manage that. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Not everybody needs to be a hunter. That's not for everybody.
And that would ruin the ecosystem.
Yeah.
For sure.
And
So I guess diverting a little bit back.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know.
Back out of the rabbit hole.
We made it out.
Yeah, we've found the other end. But I'm curious to know, so for just to relate it to what we know. So when we hunt, we look for certain habitats, areas, things like that. So when you're birding, obviously with ducks, if you look for wetlands or whatever. But is there, in your experience, have you gotten to a point where, okay, if you see a certain type of foliage or plant or, whatever, is that this is going to be a money spot for fill in the blank with a bird? Have you gotten to that point? And what are some of the more common habitats that you look for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's very dependent on the species that you're trying to find. And one thing to also remember is that birds have wings and they fly, and they're not going to be where you want them to be every single time. And so it can be addicting in the same way that like gambling on a slot machine is addicting, because like, you know, sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't. Even if everything's just right, sometimes you just don't see the bird because they have wings. They could be in the next canyon over, you know. So like for example, I've been out looking for northern goshawk for a long time, and that's like been my nemesis bird. Like I've gone out searching for that thing and missed it tons of times. But what I'm looking for is fairly high elevation in the mountains. Like I'm thinking in Utah, I'll go up in a canyon, probably try to get off the trail as much as I can and just go straight up the mountain, to where on the shady side of the mountain where there's more pines, less juniper, more pines, really tall pines. And then I've had people tell me with the northern goshawk, it chooses when it wants to be seen and you don't get to see it. But there's like a specific habitat you want to be in. You want to be pretty rocky, pretty high elevation. You want it to be...
Is that the nemesis bird?
That's the nemesis bird.
Oh, no.
Yep, northern goshawk, man.
See, and that's so crazy to me, because like I can look at that and I'm like, I can think of like 10 other birds that look like this. Yeah. So that would be impossible for me to identify. So at that point, is it the elevation and the habitat that's like,
this is a goshawk?
Yeah. Is that like what would set it apart? If you saw one like flying, you'd be like, oh, I know what that is.
Not necessarily. So they live in pretty similar habitats to other... So they're in a family called accipiters. So we're talking sharp-shinned hawks, Cooper's hawks, and northern goshawks. That's kind of the ones that we think about when we think of accipiters, and they all really like dense pines. The other two are a little more common, and they look fairly similar. An adult northern goshawk is way more like gray and like kind of less like browns and reds. So when you see an adult northern goshawk, it's like there's nothing else that looks like an adult northern goshawk, at least in the habitat you're going to be in. Like if you go over to Europe, there's some other species and stuff.
Right.
But here in North America, if you see something that looks like that, it's like, okay, it's a huge hawk that like, if it looks like an accipiter but like twice the size as the other ones, then and you're up in the mountains and it's gray, you know, that's kind of, there's all these different things. And my brother-in-law's into birding, and he's a doctor, and he says it's very similar to like diagnosing a sickness. Like when you're trying to identify a bird, there's all these different factors, and you know, your bird that you think you saw could match up perfectly with something that's just like not found there. You know, like you don't want to diagnose it as something that just is totally impossible. And so usually, like I've gone out and seen a bird and not left it unidentified because I don't know for sure what it was. You know what I mean? And
right.
It's an interesting experience, like as far as integrity goes, because like you're out there, it's just your list, you know.
Yeah.
And you could, if it's plausible, you could say that you saw it, you know. But if you did it spoils the whole experience. You know what I mean? Like,
because then you'll forever question it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I have it on my list, but
could it have been something else? Yeah, it probably could have been. Man. And so
that is frustrating.
Yeah. So, and there's experiences like that you can have hunting and fishing too, you know, like where it's like, ugh, so close, but like my ethics are keeping me from like bagging that one. You know what I mean? So, so yeah, you get that a lot with birding. And so sometimes like people, you know, if you've had an experience like that where you've had to go like leave it unidentified, it becomes like, okay, now I really need to go out and find this bird and get a really good, maybe get a picture, get a really good look at it, you know. So that's kind of fun. And I have a few nemesis birds that, you know, you just try so hard you can't quite see them, you know. You've been out there in the right place, the right time, you just still can't quite see them. So
yeah, you kind of answered my next question there of like how often do you go out and like see a bird where you're like, I don't know what that is.
Well, I mean, I think about that, and like technically almost every single time I go out, I see something fly past. And it's too quick, I can't quite identify it. It's probably something that's pretty common that I've seen before and will see on that exact bird walk, but but like sometimes it's like, you know, a little bit more acute in the sense that like that looked a lot like what I wanted to see, but I don't quite have enough to nail it down. So, and especially that happens when like I only hear something and I'm like, oh, like I wish I recorded that, you know. There's some birders that go out with really nice like recording equipment, like parabolic microphones with like the big disc on them, and just to avoid that. And that's where like a lot of the like really, really nice binoculars and spotting scopes come into play. It's for that exact reason. Like you don't want to like maybe see something. And so people will spend a lot of money to get like the best binoculars so that they don't have that experience.
Right.
Like they have a little bit more of an edge. They can maybe see that much more of what's going on. Same with like the microphone equipment. You want to hear stuff that's going on. And so you can like go back and like replay it and compare it with other people's recordings and make sure you got it just right. So
yeah,
can get pretty crazy.
I've heard that. I work at Mountain Archery, and so I sell a lot of like hunting and archery equipment, and we deal with, you know, Vortex and Leica and Swarovski. And I was talking to a guy, sold him some NL Pures.
Oh, that's a Lamborghini of binoculars, man.
I know. And they actually came in because they were back ordered, and so I got them in, and I was like looking through them, and my life has changed after looking through theirs. Like that's amazing. The goal. They're like $3,000.
Yeah.
But he was saying, he's like, I've been looking through them, but really what sold me, I've been reading reviews, and the birding community has signed off on these.
Oh yeah.
And they're way more particular than any hunting community out there. He's like, if the birders pass them off, then they're going to be pretty dang good.
Yeah, I've talked to hunters that tell me about these nice binoculars that they got, and I'm just like, okay.
Yeah. Subpar.
Yeah, whatever.
They're okay.
They're okay. But
yeah, those NL Pures, have you looked through those?
Oh my gosh, yes.
They're so nice.
They're like, should I do this or should I get a nice or like a crappy car?
I know.
Like,
or live for 3 months.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah,
it's so expensive.
They're something else, man.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. The best thing Swarovski makes are their BTX spotting scopes.
Yeah,
have you
with
tried
the
those?
2 eyes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the forehead rest.
Yeah.
And like the 115 millimeter.
Now we're getting into some
lens.
serious money though.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's like
ridiculous.
Yeah, those are even more than the NL Pures.
I think they're about like $5,000 when you're adding like the BTX eyepiece and then like the 115 millimeter objective lens. I think you're like looking at like $5,000, but
that thing's like the size of a volleyball.
It's incredible.
It's crazy.
Yeah, they're incredible, but you got to spend the money to do it.
Yeah.
And so I guess that kind of is a segue into something else that we could talk about. It's kind of like the gear, getting into birding. Like, what do you need to get into that? Like, what's kind of like your startup cost to be able to do it? Because we're talking about this high end gear that's like, oh, it'd be so nice, but obviously you don't need that nice of stuff.
You don't.
But at the same time, it's like you probably might have a bad experience if you don't have at least to this level. That's how hunting is, anyways. It's like, yeah, you can get by with some really crappy gear, but you're probably going to have a crappy experience.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you probably don't need the most expensive stuff out there.
Well,
and
that's something that we've talked about in previous episodes, talking about like it's really you're spending money for a certain level of comfort, which might not necessarily be the same in the birding community, but I would be curious to know like bare minimum, what does it look like for you to basically ensure you're going to at least have a good experience that might like bring you back out.
Yeah,
that's what we want to know.
No, that's good. Like I said before, like you can see birds just walking out your front door. You can set up a feeder. That's pretty low cost. You see some birds. But if you want to have a little bit more of like a birding experience, like a seeking out and finding kind of experience, which to me is most rewarding, is when I like have a target bird that I want to see, and then I go out and I see it.
Yeah. Right.
Like, so you kind of need a bare minimum. Binoculars are, you just need them. Like, just because of, as opposed to like a spotting scope or some other kind of like a monoscope or something that you put on, like just for sheer maneuverability. Like sometimes a bird's flying really fast and you just got to whip them up, you just got to, and you got to be able to see what you're looking at. So binoculars work really good for that.
So what would be an entry level binocular?
Yeah, so the first ones I got, which is the ones that I still use, are Vortex Crossfires. As far as, I don't know if you want to get into like actual optics, but most birders will stick to either like a 10 by 42 or an 8 by 42.
Yeah.
If you get too high, so just for those who don't know, the first number that I'm saying, 8 or 10, that's the magnification. And then the second number, in a more confusing way, kind of talks about field of view.
Yeah.
Right? So 42 is good enough for birding, for the field of view. But the 10, if you go higher than 10, sometimes it can be too much zoom.
Magnification.
Gets shaky when you're just freehand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same for hunting.
Because you don't have like a tripod you're putting it up on. You're just using just your muscles, and so that can get a little too shaky. Some people on the East Coast, where like the forests are a little more like packed in, they don't go above 8 just because there's no reason to, and that gives them a little more stability. I went with a 10 mostly just because out here in the West, things are a little bit more open.
Right. A lot of mountains.
Yeah, a lot of mountains, a lot of grasslands, marshes and stuff like that. So I like to see just a little bit further. And I'm pretty young, I can hold my binoculars up for a little while with my muscles.
Yeah.
There's some like older birders that I know that like to, go with lower magnification just because, they get tired of holding them up for a while. So it's just kind of up to you on your comfortability. I've heard from people you probably shouldn't get binoculars that are less than $100. Like anything less than $100 you should be curious about and really look into it. If you see like great deal $25 binoculars,
right,
just don't.
Just don't.
It's not worth it.
No.
You might, but I mean, I went to DI. I've like gotten some younger kids into birding, and you can just go to your thrift shop down the street and find some old binoculars that work okay. And if it's okay and you can see good, doesn't matter, right? You can get them for $10 at a thrift shop.
Yeah.
But I would go with something that's not less than $100. I think these are like 120.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice too to have something to hold them up with. So most binoculars will come with like a neck strap. I've found that if you're out for like longer than a half hour, sometimes a neck strap can get a little much. Things get really heavy after like a half hour just on your neck with that one point of contact. So you can get like harnesses. There's just your simple, they kind of look like suspenders that, they have like a diamond shaped thing on your back, and then they come around your shoulders and hold the binoculars up. Or you can, I went a little crazy with my harness. Cotton Carriers is a really good brand. They have kind of a cool system, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but it's got this little thing that kind of locks in.
Okay.
Oh, that's nice.
So you can take it on and off really easy. So those, I can wear my binoculars all day with this Cotton Carrier, and I don't feel them.
Mm-hmm.
So that just increases. They're kind of more expensive, but I can go all day. Like I said, you don't even feel them. So, and then if you want, a camera can be nice. Traditionally, birders haven't really been photographers like in the olden times, just because cameras are harder to take out into, the wilderness. But cameras are becoming more accessible, so you can get some nice stuff. I've had this camera forever. It's just a little Canon PowerShot SX530HS. I don't know what those numbers mean. But it's got 50 times optical zoom, which is nice because I can see further with my little dinky point and shoot camera than I can with my binoculars.
Gotcha.
So, and then I can get a shot of it. And you can, sometimes for beginners, a camera is nicer just because you can get a shot of something that you can identify in the field, and then you can take that picture back and study it and figure out what it is you saw.
Good point.
So binoculars, maybe a camera, and a harness.
Yeah.
I see that you brought books. As far as like identifying birds, is that your main source of identification? Is the reference books?
Yeah. Well, no, but they're nice to have. So it's kind of clunky to take a book out if you're like me, trying to find a goshawk. I'm like scaling this mountain. I don't want to be like carrying a book like I'm going to school or something. So they make apps.
Okay.
So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology comes out with a lot of really good apps for birding. So their best one for beginners is called Merlin Bird ID.
This is now our trail fork.
Merlin Bird ID.
Yeah.
Sponsored by. Just
Sponsored
kidding.
by, yeah. So that's a good one just because you can see all the birds, and it's got a cool feature where it's got a few cool features. It's got a photo identification. So if you get a picture of it and you don't know what it is, you can upload the picture to the app and it'll tell you what it is.
That's nice.
I
would need that.
There's
1,000%.
yeah, I use it all the time. And then a little bit more easy to use is just like a checklist kind of thing. So it gets your location with your phone, and then it gets like the time of year that you saw it, and then you pick like the size of the bird and then the colors and then what it was doing, and then it kind of creates a list of possible birds that you could have seen. So it kind of narrows it down for you, so you're in the right neighborhood. That helps a lot. And then you can look at the bird profile and like play the song, and you're like, oh, that's what I heard. Yes, that was my bird that I saw. And then you can go back and just study the birds if you want. They just came out with a really cool technology on Merlin where you can record a bird, and it will, using the sound technology, it will like identify the bird using the song. So that's really nice for beginners. And they've been working on that for a long time. I've been following it, and it's been years. And they just came out with one that they feel like works good, and it's pretty impressive. Like it gets them right on. And yeah, so that, and then books for like when you're at home, you got the spare minute, you can study up on your birds. It's a little bit more, it's nice to have something in your hand looking at. And yeah, the nice thing too about Merlin Bird ID is it connects to a database called eBird, and that's also connected with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And they, so eBird tracks bird species and sightings by birders. So it's kind of just like community science project where it just compiles all the bird sightings that all these birders have ever submitted.
Frick.
And kind of gives you a good idea of like where you might see a bird. Also, if you're in a place where there is a community of birders, you can, which is most places, you can like go on and see what other people are seeing and where they're seeing them. And then if you have a target bird that somebody else is seeing, you can go out and try to find it. So that's kind of nice. So eBird is a good one, and Merlin Bird ID. Those are what I use a lot. And then a good place to just write down your life list. eBird will keep track of your life list. Like you can make a profile. It's all free. And it keeps track of it for you. I kind of like to have something like where I can write it down.
Yeah.
Makes it seem a little more permanent, I guess, if you're like writing it down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what this other book is. It's kind of got a place where I can write down my sightings and then keep a tally of all the birds that I've seen.
So I have like two kind of final questions. Tom might have some more. So one is what's your life list? What number are you to?
Oh,
man, I gotta look. Let's see.
What are we at? What are we at here?
We're about 38 minutes.
Okay.
I got...
Oh,
that's that's all the way full.
No. I got plenty of room to go. 273. So 300 is kind of like a big milestone for people.
Yeah.
Like you've really been doing something if you get to 300, especially out in the West. It's a little bit easier. They get a little more species out in the East Coast, but out here in the West, getting 300 is kind of like, all right.
You're a birder.
You are a birder. I mean, you're a birder no matter what if you're trying to find birds, but like 300 is kind of a big deal. 200 was kind of a cool point too. So yeah, my last one was a Pinion Jay. That was in southern Utah that I saw it. So
crazy.
That is.
And
just looking for birds. 300 of them. Here I am thinking there's only 12 birds that exist.
I know. Like, well, there's like 4 different kinds of ducks, an eagle,
a hawk,
an owl. Yeah.
Just a hawk.
Man, when you start getting into it, you just start noticing everything around you. Like,
yeah.
And
it's so cool. It brings such an awareness to your surroundings with this kind of a mindset.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, I'm in nature, there's birds flying around. It's like, oh, that's what that is.
That's what
so
that bird
cool.
is.
That is so cool. You only hear it? Yeah, that's distinct to that bird.
Yeah. It would be
They're
cool.
only here for like a month. That's crazy.
And that's the thing. Yeah, that's where I think it gets cool, because even on our bear hunting trip, we came across a cinnamon teal, and I had never seen one before.
Oh yeah. Those are cool.
But I was like,
it's like a
dang.
trophy in the waterfowl like hunting world.
Yeah.
At least for
here.
around here,
Yeah.
because they're not common during the fall.
And so we saw one, and I was like, I've never seen that kind of duck before, And in my mind, I was like, but it's just a duck. Like, it's a duck.
Yeah.
But then Ben's like, oh, but they're super rare. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm like
Yeah,
intrigued
that's
by
cool.
this
Yeah.
duck.
Yeah.
So I could see where that would be pretty cool if you're like out, even if you're just out hunting and then you see this, your nemesis bird, whatever that one's
Northern
called.
goshawk.
Yeah. You see that and it's like literally people dream about seeing this bird. And I
Yeah.
just saw one.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy.
It's the novelty of it.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. There's a owl that you can pretty much only get in the Rockies in like southern Idaho, Utah, and some parts of Arizona in the summertime. It's called a flammulated owl. And man, I've taken people personally that have like traveled from Florida to come out and see this owl.
So you've seen it.
I've seen it, yeah. And so there's a guy in Salt Lake County that I know who, like, he makes a business around, like, taking people to find flammulated owls.
That's
like, people will
crazy.
pay him
That
for a
specific
guaranteed sighting of this specific bird. And so he'll be out in the springtime, like, tracking down spots where he thinks he might see him, and then he'll see him, and then he'll go out, like, almost every single night or every other night to try and, like, make sure he's got a handle on these
There
owls.
she is. Got black demon eyes.
Does that look right?
Yeah, it makes them hard to see because I don't know anybody that's seen one of those owls during the day.
That would look like a tree trunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't see them in the daytime, and at night they're harder than other owls because if you're spotlighting or using a flashlight, their eyes don't shine. Like most owls, their eyes will like reflect back something, so you can kind of track them down. But these guys, you just gotta
Know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I guess.
Gosh, damn.
I've always found them by sound. Like I'll hear them, or like I'll call them in with song, and then they'll come in and
That's a whole nother.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to take a break before we get into that.
it's pretty fun. And when they fly in and everybody's like, oh, that's a fun experience.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I'm gonna have to get your other questions after a break.
Yeah, let's take a
Sounds
quick
good.
break. This will be the end of part 1 of the episode with Joe Andreasen about birding, and we will be right back with you for part 2. Stay tuned.